Bold Bytes, your bite-sized guide to payments.
First off, I want to say thank you to all of you for attending today. This is going to be the second education series of 2026. These webinars are designed to educate the unknown, strengthen expertise, and consider several perspectives. On the fourth Tuesday of every month, I will either be presenting or hosting a panel discussion with industry experts to discuss the many levels of the payments industry. Some upcoming topics that we'll be covering include the importance of foundational KYC. That'll be going on in March. And then in April, we will be doing educating merchants during the underwriting, risk reviews, and compliance inquiry process. So make sure you definitely register for those when you see those links go out. Today, we will be discussing PCI compliance and why ignoring it is not the ideal strategy. And following the webinar, we will be sending out the recording, the slide deck, and an FAQ sheet that I've created with just some of the most frequently asked questions that we see from our partners and merchants. Additionally, at the top of your screen, your GoToWebinar screen, there is a chat feature. We will be doing a Q&A session at the end. So if you see any questions that you have that don't get answered while we are going through the process, please feel free to put your question in there and I will make sure to get to it at the end. All right, ignoring PCI compliance, not a bold strategy. I know you all love my puns. Make sure that I include it on every single one. So let's discuss, what is PCI? So PCI-DSS is Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. What does that mean? That sounds complicated. So PCI-DSS defines the security requirements that protect the environments that process payments. So basically every merchant that processes any type of credit cards or payments, they want to make sure that they have an environment that is secure. And PCI-DSS is a standard that provides basically a baseline of technical and operational requirements designed to protect the account data. Some different aspects that they ask about during the questionnaire is going to be things like, do you have two-factor authentication in place for your accounts? Do you have the payment system separate from other parts of your business, such as guest Wi-Fi and security cameras, things like that? And then also, what kind of connection type do you have? Is it a more secure connection, or is it something that goes through a web browser that may have a little bit more of a vulnerability to it? So what's included to get PCI compliant? This is a question that we have. There's a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of different lingo that goes with PCI that everybody, I'm sure, on this call has either been a victim to the confusion or has also had conversations with people who are just lost in the verbiage. So I'll go through the 3 points so that you have a little bit of an understanding of when it's necessary, when it's not necessary, and what these things are. So the SAQ, you'll hear that a lot. The SAQ is a self-assessment questionnaire. This is basically a series of questions that verifies that the requirements are met based on the connection type that you have. So you do have to really understand what kind of connection type you have, and I will go through the SAQ types in a little bit more detail later in the presentation. But for the most part, you're all going to fall under one of 4 categories. There are very few merchants that fall under any of the other SAQs that are a little bit more complicated to understand, but we'll go through that at a later time. So the vulnerability scan. So the vulnerability scan is a way of basically scanning your system to make sure that if there are any outside access points available, that they're being addressed, because the last thing that we want is for a fraudster or a bad actor to be able to infiltrate your system. As we all know, and I know that my team can definitely vouch for this, is fraud is everywhere. Fraud is not going anywhere. Fraud is actually finding new and wonderful ways of making it into our lives. And so with the vulnerability scan, what you're doing is you're basically allowing the PCI standards to go through and check and make sure that how you have it set up is going to be the most secure way of doing so. Scans are required quarterly. If you do have a connection type that requires a scan, they are required quarterly, but not every connection type. So like a virtual terminal or a wireless connection, those are two connection types that don't require a scan. But if you are connected just with an Ethernet cable or just through a regular POS type of system, standalone system, those are the connection types that would definitely need a scan to make sure you're lacking vulnerability. And then the AOC. So people want to know, what's the AOC? Do I need one? Yes, you do. The AOC is the attestation of compliance. So basically what happens is you complete your questionnaire. That's for whatever connection type you have. If you need to do a scan, then you need to schedule that and go through that process and then attest the scan. And then at the end of it, you basically need to attest that everything that you have now done is done to the best of your knowledge, that you were not, specifically or deliberately giving false information, and you are attesting and proving that they were completed and you have been found to be compliant. And then the attestation of compliance gives you that date, that expiration date for when you need to complete everything the following year. So why is being PCI compliant important? If a merchant's involved in payment processing, they're holding sensitive cardholder data. They are holding access to something that people all over the world are able to use to make people victims of fraud. I mean, you're handling very important details that for the most part, as a merchant, you just kind of say, well, I take a credit card. Credit cards are everywhere. What's the big deal? Well, that's why everywhere needs to be PCI compliant. Every merchant needs to be able to follow these standards. Otherwise, you are putting yourself at risk of dealing with a bad actor infiltrating your system. It is a requirement that's set by card brands too. So if you are at all ever a victim of a cyber attack or of somebody basically gaining access to your POS or to your virtual terminal, if that happens and you are not PCI compliant, there can be serious consequences that come down from the card brands. If you are PCI compliant and something was still able to go through, you usually have to provide proof that you are still PCI compliant. You still have to go through a new questionnaire, you have to go through a scan, and you have to attest that you are compliant and that you are following the standards that are put in place. And then also, the most important reason that I think is the reason why everyone's here is that processors impose PCI non-compliance fees for anyone who does not maintain their PCI compliance. So I know for some of the processors that we work with, the fee is anywhere from $40 to $70 and then can go all the way up to $100. When it comes to things outside of our country, there are actually places that I learned from a dear partner of ours a couple of weeks ago that, like in Europe, for instance, they're very much so trying to crack down on this, and they are issuing $1,000 PCI non-compliance fees monthly. So that's definitely something to think about when you are trying to get a merchant to understand why this is important. So even if you just think $70 a month, that's a pretty penny per year that the merchant could be saving if they just took a questionnaire once a year. Really not that hard. Who's responsible for making a merchant PCI compliant? Well, luckily, it's the merchant's responsibility to complete their yearly attestation. So any quarterly scans, their yearly SAQ, and attesting their compliance, that is the merchant's responsibility. If they're not familiar with the process or how to answer the questions or how to set up a scan or what kind of connection they have, like if they're that technically unsavvy, they can reach out to resources. I mean, through any portal that you do PCI compliance, there are support numbers and emails that can help you with the questionnaires. If you have a technician that helped you set up your Ethernet, your Wi-Fi, whatever the case may be, if you have somebody that you trust that can help you kind of answer these questions for you or with you, that's always a possibility as well. But they also can reach out to whoever installed their equipment. So, as our partners and as the advisors for these merchants, it would be a good idea to have somebody on staff that is capable of at least answering these questions, maybe not necessarily for the merchant if you don't feel comfortable doing that, but being able to be there as a resource for them if they have any questions about how their setup is handled. And then a question that we get a lot, and we've had some internal confusion about this, is can an ISO or ISV or agent complete the SAQ and scan on behalf of the merchant? And the short answer is yes. So the short answer is that basically they just, card brands, the processors, the acquiring banks, they just want the merchant to be PCI compliant. They want to be able to say that their portfolio and their book of business is all secure and that there's no ways of having to deal with fraud, because as I said, fraud's everywhere and we're kind of getting inundated with it. So definitely able to do it for it. And also because the weight of a accurate PCI questionnaire and making sure the scan goes through, all of those things, that has a much higher weight because it's accurate. It has all correct information. You're not just guessing because you don't really know the answer, or you're just saying yes because you think that that's what they want you to hear, or they want you to say. You definitely can do it for your merchant. We do have several partners that do their PCI compliance for their merchants. However, something you do want to be careful of is the liability shift. So if it is the merchant's responsibility, it falls on the merchant. If something goes wrong, it's on the merchant. If they have some sort of account data compromise where someone's able to access their system and run fraudulent transactions, that is their responsibility to make sure that they are secure. So if you do it for them and there's some sort of issue, that liability shift can now shift to your team and your company. So that is something that you definitely want to consider before moving forward with that decision. So there are several SAQ types. I believe there are about 10, if I remember correctly. I think there's 10. I'm going to go through the most common first, because these are the ones that you probably will all deal with more frequently. And then I'll go through just quickly the ones that are much less common so that you can get an understanding of why all the information that's out there doesn't necessarily need to be information you get to deal with. So first one that I'm going to go through is the SAQ-B. So this one is something that is currently still available. However, it is also an SAQ that will eventually be going away because it's specifically for terminals and POS stations that are connected via phone line. As we know, phone line and dial-out systems are they're getting phased out. So this is one that might not be able to be used moving forward. So I would keep that in mind. And any, maybe small suburban areas that have a dial-up system in place that you know of within your portfolio, it might be a good idea to start working with them to move them to a different setup. SAQ BIP. So this is going to be anything that is through an IP address, has an Ethernet cable, has a LAN cable, anything that is set up with your average normal internet setup. So this will be any standalone device, any POS system. So this would be something where you are moving through an internal network or the internet. And this is going to require a scan. The BIP is going to require a scan because there are more areas of vulnerability by going through the internet and internal networks. SAQ CVT. So this one is going to be specifically for virtual terminals. This one is if you're accessing an internet connected web browser. The funny thing is that the BIP, also through the internet, requires a scan. The CVT doesn't require a scan. I think because for the most part, the CVT virtual terminals, you're dealing with things more like credentials on file. You're dealing with more AVS features that are required, even doing anything like a website, going through an e-com system. That's going to have account verification systems in place to be able to secure the connection and the transaction information a little bit better. And you have CAPTCHA, you have things like that. So there's a couple of different areas that you can secure the website as a whole. And so that's why there's not really a scan for the connection, because the connection's usually going through a PCI certified third party vendor. And the SAQD. So the SAQD is really a combination of a lot of the most common SAQs, but it's kind of something where they're not really eligible for any of the ones that I just mentioned. They're kind of e-commerce merchants who accept cardholder data on their website, merchants with electronic storage for cardholder data, and also just POS systems that maybe have a third party involved, things of that nature. It's kind of a catch-all. That's what this SAQ is. So it's one that sometimes the way that you answer your SAQ, it'll shift. Like you think you're answering it for BIP, but it'll shift to a D just based on the answers that you provided. So sometimes it'll go that way, because most portals, you're picking your connection type and you're starting the questionnaire, but you're not specifically stating, I want this SAQ. So that's something to keep in mind, is that sometimes you're going to have an SAQD, even if it's not something that you were intentionally going out to do. And then these are the less common SAQ types. I'm not going to go through these in detail just because they are not ones that you will see very often, but this slide deck will be sent out to everybody. So if you have any questions about the internals of these SAQs, you can definitely take a look at the slide in more detail. But these are just different connections, different ways of processing. They have a P2PE with specific hardware solution that is vendor approved by the PCI Security Council. The SAQ-DSP is specifically for service providers. So there's just a lot of ambiguity within these. And as I read through them, I said there are not a lot of people that would actually fall into any of these categories. So you're not going to really see this a lot, but it is something to at least know in case you do have merchants that are kind of outside of the normal processing spectrum. All right, scans. So this is kind of, I think, the place where people see the most issues when it comes to scans failing, because they really don't understand what's the problem. So I just have a couple of questions here that I answered based on partner questions, internal team questions. So does every merchant require a network scan? So as I said, they are determined by the SAQ type. Quarterly scans are required for the SAQ BIP and the SAQ D, and these are POS connected by Ethernet SAQs. So this is going to be something that is specific to running transactions through an internal network or internet. And then how often does this scan need to occur? They are quarterly. So once the first scan passes, they give you a date for your next scan to be done by. So on the next slide, I'll show you an image of one of our portals, one of our PCI portals, and what a scan merchant looks like when they're fully compliant, and the two different dates for the expiration dates for your SAQ and for your scan. And then what should a merchant or ISO know about scan requirements? So there should be no outside accessibility to the part where your system processes payments. So you will notice a lot of times your system will fail because your POS is set up on a network that is also connected to your security cameras and your guest Wi-Fi and your office Wi-Fi and things of that nature. And you have to make sure that the part where payments are being processed is in its own port, is its own section that can be scanned with its own IP address, and only that will be found on there. Every other part needs to be on a separate port, on a separate IP, and disconnected from the payment so that it is as secure as possible. And then every other IP, every other part of your restaurant can be operating on different IPs, different ports, in order to make sure that it's not connected and there's no vulnerabilities throughout all of those other processes, especially security cameras, guest Wi-Fi. I mean, that's why people always talk about if you go onto like a shared Wi-Fi at the airport or something like that, it's not secure. And it's because so many people have access to it. So you want to make sure that if you are processing payments, it is on its own specific designated secure sector. So this is what the portal within so if you have merchants that are boarded with priority payment systems and they are doing their PCI compliance through Viking Cloud that is accessed through MX Merchant, if you are a merchant who runs a scan, this is what your compliant page will look like on the portal. So I'm going to kind of start at the top left. This is the end all be all, you are compliant. If this does not have a green check mark, then you are not compliant. Something is wrong. And luckily, in the 3 sections below, you will notice there are green check marks throughout. If any one of those does not have a green check mark, that is the area that you will want to go to complete the scan, complete your profile, complete your attestation, and then as soon as all 3 on the bottom are green, the top left will be green as well. So as you see where the green shield is at the top left, is it then underneath it says you're compliant, valid until December 26th of 2026. So that is your date. That is your year date for when you have to reattest your SAQ, go back in and request compliance. You can do it before this date. That new date that you completed will be the new deadline a year later. So if you go in on, December 26th, that's Christmas or right around Christmas, the day after Christmas. Do you want to go in on the day after Christmas to do this? No. You can always go in on December 15th. Reattest, finish your business profile, create a new scan, what have you. As soon as all of the bottom 3 sections are compliant, the new date will pop up as December 15th, 2027. And then you can move forward from there. Where I have the arrow pointed, that is where a merchant or a partner, anybody with access to this portal for a merchant's account, that is where you will be able to download your attestation of compliance. So if you're ever in a situation where, let's say, you made the merchant compliant, and for some reason, the portals and the platforms that we're using there's a synchronization glitch. And this says it's compliant. Let's say MX Merchant says it's compliant, but in MX Connect, it says it's not compliant. And the merchant's getting charged fees after the fact of when they were made compliant. So you can go in here, download the attestation of compliance where I have that arrow pointing, and you can submit that into MX Connect, request that they update the merchant's PCI expiration date and their status, and then request refunds for the fees that were issued incorrectly. So that's where that part can be taken place, but that is where you will access the attestation of compliance. The bottom 3 sections are going to be the 3 main points that are a part of becoming PCI compliant. So the first box on the left is going to be your SAQ. When you are in this area and you press manage, that is when you will be given access to the questionnaire, and you can go through, you can pick your connection type, you can start answering the questions to the best of your knowledge, go through the entire SAQ. Once you are done with that, when you come out and you have finished your SAQ, your business profile will have the green check mark. As you can see with this one, the way that the answers were put through is that the SAQ type did come out as D, which does include the BIP and C SAQ types within it. Then the second section is for when you do your scans. So you will schedule a scan of your system, you input your IP address, and then the system accesses it at whatever time you determine and will run the scan of your system. If it comes back as a good scan, then basically it will request that you attest the scan results, which then get sent to the back-end section of this platform where they approve it. And then it comes back as compliant. And then you will see the green check mark once it's fully compliant with the new date of when your scan needs to be completed. So as you can see, this scan is due March 25th, 2026, where the SAQ is due December 26th of 2026. So you have to do this scan quarterly, and they give you a separate date for when that needs to be completed. And then the final section is once you have green check marks for your SAQ and your scan, you will need to attest the entire thing. And once you go into here, there's just a couple of questions to say like, hey, do you agree? Do you agree? Do you agree? You say yes, 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 yes. You sign your name at the bottom. So the owner can do it. If you're the partner doing it on their behalf, I would probably do something along the lines of like POS reseller or agent or something along those lines, and then sign your name, which is just a digital signature. It's not a physical signature. And then once you're completed with that, that becomes attested. You get the green check mark, and then all three check marks include the main check mark, and that is why this merchant is considered compliant. If you see any red check marks or any red X's, if you see any orange, if you see anything that is a different color than a green check mark, that section has not been fully compliant. So it's that easy to be able to follow. So the next couple of slides, basically what I did is I went to my internal teams and I requested that they provide any questions that they get on a regular basis. Anything that any of our partners or merchants have just consistently asked that they feel would be a really important answer for you all to have. So these are kind of general, more overall questions, but I'm going to go through each one. And if you have any questions about these questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can go over them at the end. So how to access your PCI portal. Every merchant, when they are onboarded, will receive an email from the PCI portal vendor granting access. So for the two processors that we mostly work with, which are priority payment systems and defined payments, they utilize a separate section of their business. It doesn't directly come from priority payment systems or define. It'll come from whatever that third party vendor is that is making sure that you are accessing it. So with priority payment systems, it will come from the MX merchant portal because that is how a merchant will gain access to the Viking Cloud platform. They have to go through the MX merchant platform in order to do it. But when they are onboarded, they will receive that email for MX merchant access, and then they can be walked through it by partners, by anyone on our client services team, anybody who has the availability and the access to be able to walk them through how to get to the portal and how to register and get signed up for it. They will be given that access from the start. But if they don't know that they have to do this, if no one's telling them that they have to do this when they're starting to sign the contracts and what have you, that is really the area that we're seeing of merchants' confusion involving PCI compliant. So how to access it, they will be granted access. They just don't know what it is, and they need to be taught how to do it. What information is needed to register? So for priority payment systems, they will need that MX merchant access that I mentioned. And then when they go to register, the only information that they will need is their merchant identification number and an email that they want notifications to be sent to. This is the place where if an ISO would rather do the PCI compliance for their merchants, you would put your email there and you would access it. You would want to be the one that's registering the account so that the emails are coming to you. Now, if a merchant does do the registration for themselves and then you end up taking over doing their PCI compliance, you can always go into the Viking Cloud account and you can update the notification emails, or you can add a notification email. So you don't have to just have it sent to one person. You can have it sent to two to kind of help yourselves, remain accountable. And then for define, you will need the location information because when you do go to register, it does ask you for the street address and the business name and the entity. So you will need the account actual information, but you will also need the merchant identification number and whatever email that you would like to use for notifications. When does a merchant need to have their compliance done to avoid non-compliance fees for newly approved MIDs? Most processors offer a 90-day grace period. So you will get onboarded and you will have 90 days to understand how to access your portal, complete your questionnaire, do your scan if that's required, complete your attestation, and then you will not be liable for any fees moving forward. But you do get 90 days. Once that 90 days is passed, it is your responsibility to make sure that you're being made compliant, all merchants. When will a merchant be issued a non-compliance fee if they miss a deadline? So a merchant, first of all, a merchant should not miss a deadline. They should put it in their calendars that it is due on this date and have it set for a week before to access it. They should be including it in their normal business function. It should be something that they say, the year has come and gone. I mean, it's one questionnaire a year. It's one scan a quarter. We are not asking you to go on there every single day and complete a 100-question questionnaire. This is something where it's once a year. It's paying taxes. It's updating your liquor license. It's things of that nature. It's just a normal part of your business. And if they start to incorporate that, they won't miss the deadline. And then we don't have to worry about it. So that's just the first little soapbox that I'm going to stand on. However, the answer to the question of when it will happen is that if a merchant becomes compliant before the 24th of the month, then they should not be charged a fee for that month. If they become compliant after the 24th, they are at risk of being billed. So if you think about let's say their deadline is the 7th and they become compliant on the 9th, they completely miss it. They were out of town and they thought, oh, I completely forgot. They miss it. They become compliant on the 9th. They should not be billed the fee because it's before the 24th. If they are compliant, if their deadline is the 21st and they don't become compliant until the 26th, they're at risk of getting that fee. So they need to keep that in mind, and you need to keep that in mind. And then if they do become compliant within the month, we can request a refund. We can do all of these things, but you have to now determine where is that refund's liability going to land, because if it's a legitimate, they weren't compliant at the time of being billed, then that refund will fall on the partner's residuals. That will fall on the merchant. That's not something that the processor will say, oh, yep, that's our mistake. That would fall on you at that point. So definitely keep that in mind if that's the way you're thinking. And then, do merchants and or partners get notifications about PCI compliance automatically? And if so, what, how, and when? So whatever email is registered with the portal or emails, that email will receive a notification 30 days out and 2 weeks out. So you want to make sure that if you're receiving that email, you're not ignoring it. And that if you put the wrong address, you put the wrong email. We have several merchants that they get the email and then they reach out to us and they say, hey, I need to become compliant. And so we'll, help them gain access and we'll make sure that they know how to get into the portal and continue with what they do. But that is something that they will get notified. It will come through. They just have to be paying attention to the emails that are coming through. This is actually an example email that comes through for when your assessment questionnaire is about to expire. So this one came through for an expiration date for January 24th, 2026, and it tells you exactly what needs to be done, what's happening. It gives you access to the website, how to log in, and then you're able to move forward with that process from there. What are the escalation paths for issues that with logging into the PCI portal? So if a merchant is having issues with logging in specifically to the PCI portal, they're unable to register, they're getting an unknown MID error, whatever the case may be, they can reach out to our Bold Client Services team. Everyone on the team is trained in being able to navigate the MX Merchant platform to the PCI portal, how to reset passwords, how to register, how all of those things. They are capable of getting you through there. So I did put the support email and the support phone number for you. So please feel free to reach out to our team if you have any questions about just accessing, logging into the portal. What if someone needs help understanding the SAQ questions? That is where our Bold CS team will stop. They will not be providing the answers or walking you through the SAQ questionnaire because that is where, we don't know how your merchant is set up. So we can't tell you the answers, number one. Number two, we don't know how you're set up. So if we're asking you the question or the merchant the question and they don't understand the question, they're not going to be able to there's no way of being able to communicate that. And it shifts the liability onto someone on our team that is a remote person who does not know how the system is set up and does not have access to it. So if you need help with the actual questions, best place to go would probably be to either the POS provider or an in-house technician that understands how your system is set up and how to answer the questions, how to kind of put the questions in layman's terms of how it's functioning so that you can move forward as easily as possible. But if not, if you do not have the POS provider, you don't have an in-house technician, what have you, every merchant has access to a support team through the PCI portals that they can request help from. So the Priority PCI by Viking Cloud, I've put their phone number and their support email, as well as the Define and Citro PCI. Both of these contact informations are also included if you're looking at the login page of the portal. On the top right, there is either a little phone icon or on the Citro page, it's just listed there outright. The phone number and the email address are there for the merchant to access immediately. So definitely make sure that they are aware of that. Sometimes the support teams for the SAQ questions, sometimes they have a little bit of issues because, again, they're also remote. They also don't know. So they're going to just try to help give you the understanding of the question. But again, they cannot answer the questions for you because they are not involved in the process of how the merchant is set up. And then something for everybody to know, if you have any merchants that are processing through Amex Direct, there is a separate portal that they are required to do a separate Amex Direct PCI compliant. So if they're operating through Priority Payment Systems and they're doing Amex Direct, they will have to make sure that they are PCI compliant on both portals. Now, what they can do is the following question is can a merchant or ISO use a third-party attestation of compliance instead of going through the processor? So yes, they can. And what you can do in this situation is if the merchant becomes PCI compliant through Viking Cloud, through Priority Payment Systems, they can take and download that attestation of compliance and upload it to the Amex Direct portal and make themselves compliant through there, or vice versa. So they do have that capability of being able to use an outside vendor for attestation of compliance and then submit it. But if they're using a separate vendor, otherwise they can do the same thing. But that's where you can help with the having to do two for Amex Direct. If they make themselves compliant through a different vendor, they can utilize that attestation of compliance for the processor that they're currently with. So why should the merchant care about being PCI compliant? Well, first of all, it's their responsibility. It's part of their business. They should be caring about that. Extra protection by scanning the systems for vulnerabilities that put their business at risk of fraud, because the only victim to fraud is the merchant, always. Whether it's a fraudulent transaction that gets charged back from the cardholder is protected. The merchant has to pay that charge back. If it's person accesses their system and does card testing or does a bunch of fraudulent transactions that they're not aware of, all the fees for those transactions, the merchant's going to be responsible for. Any chargebacks that come from those transactions, the merchant's going to be responsible for. Making sure their system is secure is their responsibility, and they should 100% care about it. They also would be avoiding monthly PCI non-compliance fees. Again, they can range to a very high amount, and that is not something that a merchant should be putting into their budget. They should, instead of saying, oh, it's just $70 a month, what's the big deal? $70 a month for 12 months versus one questionnaire a year is a big deal, in my opinion. I would not want to spend that much money to just not do a questionnaire. Bring it on. I'll take a questionnaire any day. So that's the other one. And then protection from forensic audits during account data compromises. So a lot of you, luckily, have not had to deal with this. Unfortunately, as the head of risk and compliance, I've seen several of these go through. Account data compromises are basically times where an account has fraud happening on the back end. Maybe not necessarily seeing it. Maybe it's not coming through as card testing, but somebody has access to their system and is testing cards here and there, or is gaining access to all the cardholder data that's coming through. So what happens is MasterCard will reach out and say, hey, we had several clients come back to us with fraud on their card. And the one location that all these clients had in common with was your location. So something's wrong with your location. Someone has access to your system. Someone is pulling card data from your POS. And now you need to figure out what that is. And if any of you on this call have ever had one of these calls with me or one of these account data compromises, they are not fun. In fact, I see one partner right now that I know for a fact we've done it with. They're not fun. You can't answer the questions. You're literally looking through a needle in a haystack, but you're saying, this happened and I need to protect myself. Well, if you were fully PCI compliant and you knew for a fact that your system wasn't vulnerable to this stuff, you did multiple malware scans and virus scans consistently, and you made sure that everything was secure, this might not have ever happened. So forensic audits that come from account data compromises can be $25,000, $100,000 that the merchant would be responsible for, because it's basically the card brands having to go through and completely audit the system, bring in outside sources, bring in, I think at times even the FBI has been involved, where they're coming and they're really trying to clean sweep a person's system to figure out what went wrong. So these are very serious instances, and you want to make sure that they're protected from something like this happening. Even if they never deal with it in their life, it's probably because they're preparing for it, not because they just were lucky. That's kind of how that works. So as I mentioned, just like paying taxes, doing inventory, updating liquor licenses, a merchant should be incorporating maintaining PCI compliance into their regular practice. And that's just the last time I'm going to say that. Common pitfalls when a merchant's dealing with PCI compliance is that they're either overscoping or they're underscoping. So if they're overscoping, they're confused about the verbiage that's coming. And so they're kind of getting overwhelmed, and it's leading to frustration. So in terms of that, when they're in that type of situation, that's when they should be reaching out for help. They should be trying to find PCI compliance professionals, people who are capable of helping answer the questions, understand them for them, even people that helped set up their systems, whatever the case may be. But they should be requesting help. They should be trying to figure it out, not just saying, well, it's confusing, I'm going to go a different direction. And then underscoping. So assuming PCI doesn't apply to them. So people saying, well, I am in a nonprofit, I don't have to do PCI. Oh, I have a website, I don't have to do PCI. Be the advisor for them. Let them know that PCI compliance is something that every single person is responsible for if they run any type of transaction through their account. That's it. Full stop. And if you're involved in their life, they're running transactions through their account. Full stop. So definitely make sure that they're aware of that. So why should you, the ISO, care about a merchant's PCI compliance? Higher likelihood of attrition. If they're constantly seeing these fees, you're the one who put their system in, they were never told about it. All of these things that we hear consistently. Well, we hear this from merchants all the time. I was never told I needed to become PCI compliant. What is this fee on my statement? We hear this all the time. And that leads to them not trusting you. That leads to them saying, well, this person walked into my location, told me that I needed to get, sold me on choosing them. I chose them. No one said anything about PCI compliance. What's the deal? They've now lost that trust in you. So definitely wanting to make sure that they're aware of it will help with your relationship and avoid that friction that comes with it when they start seeing these fees come through their account. Potential blame of liability if you were the ones that installed the system. So let's say something does happen, an account data compromise, some sort of fraudulent behavior. They can try to shift that liability blame onto you. Now, it's not actualized because, again, the merchant's responsibility is to become PCI compliant. But if they didn't know about it, you installed the system, do you think they're going to stick around? Do you think they're going to still want to be a partner with you? Probably not. They're probably going to say, well, this person doesn't have my best interest at heart. I'm going to go find somebody. And the first question that I ask them is going to say, what do you do about PCI compliance? And that person can step in and be the hero to this merchant's account. So definitely something you'd want to avoid. And then, unique value proposition. So if every person in the world is selling payments, the payments industry, and every single person does the same thing, well, we'll offer you dual pricing. We'll offer you surcharging. We'll get your fees removed. We'll do this. We'll do that. We'll do this. We'll do that. If you're the one that's coming out there and saying, do you know about PCI compliance? Would you like to save money on PCI non-compliance fees every month? Do you want to understand how to do PCI compliance? Would you want me to let you know that I care about your company's well-being? You are going to go much further in that merchant's mind than some other person that's walking in the door and just saying, hey, choose me. You're going to be able to get in front of them and say, I have your best interest. I've been keeping you safe. I've been doing this. Look at all these things. It's another point of value that you can bring to that relationship that they are probably not going to see with other people. So definitely keep that in mind, especially for retention of your merchants. If you have any questions about accessing your PCI portal, please reach out to our Bold Client Services team with the email and phone number that I provided. I also reposted the PCI portal contact information for if you have any questions about the SAQ. And then if your company in general wants to certify somebody for being PCI compliant or being able to certify someone on your team to have the knowledge of PCI compliance, or if you are wanting to just kind of send a merchant in a general direction, the PCIsecuritystandards.org website has so much information. It can even be almost too overwhelming, but if you know what you're looking for and you're on a mission for specific information, definitely look into this because this is definitely something that you'd want to utilize. But that is it for my presentation. I am going to move over to the chat and the questions and see if anybody has anything. Oh, good. We have a couple of questions. So when will the reporting in MX for PCI compliance be fixed? Compliance gets completed and sits in non-compliant or pending for days. Also, and more importantly, reports for updating the PCI are inaccurate. We help make sure our clients stay compliant, and without accurate reporting of who is up for renewal, this is an issue. I completely agree, Scott. So this is an issue. We have actually been working directly with priority payment systems to complete that, to kind of fix that gap between the sync of MX Merchant or the portal, MX Merchant, and MX Connect. If you notice it, definitely let us know so that we can keep giving them examples of accounts that are experiencing this so that we can help get it fixed faster. We have had a dev ticket in with them for a couple of months at this point that they are working to fix it. And there are times where it does get fixed, but then it breaks something different. So they have to kind of pull it back in order to make sure that it's going through. So it is something that we are actively trying to get fixed. And we talk about it every Friday on a call with the processor. So I will let you know that it is something that we are working on and that we are diligently working on. And we know that it's an issue, but if you find any examples, bring them to your growth team manager. Make sure that they're aware of it so that we can keep submitting them to the processor and get the accounts fixed for you as they're coming up. And then also just providing more examples so that they can see where the issue is stemming from. So thank you for that question, Scott. Great question. Sarah, QIR certified ISO absolutely cannot complete PCI compliance for the merchant. That distinction should be made. Okay. A QIR certified ISO. So I am not familiar with that acronym. So if you would like to give some more information on that, I'd be happy to look further into it and then also send out that verification to people that were on this call. So thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. Your comment about red versus green check mark is not accurate for renewals. The attestation does not show a red X. It stays as a green circle, and it needs to know that open the attestation and click it again. Okay, so for a new account, all of those sections are going to be completely blank. It's going to be starting out brand new. And each time you complete a section, a new section is going to come up based on the questions that you just completed. And then you will need to go through and make sure that the information that's in there is accurate. And then once it's accurate and you've attested to it, it will turn green. So for a brand new mid and for that, it is not accurate. For renewals, the right side will show that there's something wrong. They will show that something needs to be coming up. If you're way ahead of the deadline, everything will still remain green because at that moment it is compliant. So it will be something that if you're going in there before the deadline, you'll just need to know that you need to reattest everything, redo your scan if it's required, and you do need to complete the attestation. So it will not show that it is red if you're in there before the deadline. You're absolutely correct, Scott, but that is something that you're going in before the deadline. If you're in there after the deadline and you're after the expiration, there will be some sort of indication of something not being compliant within the section. Do you have a document that we can present to the merchant that clearly states that bold partners are not responsible or liable for the PCI-DSS? Can you share that with us? We do not have a document like that, Barbara. That is something that it is a merchant's responsibility, and you can just make that known if that's something that you would want to complete for your personal company, because there are some companies that they do the PCI compliance for their merchants, or they're willing to be there as somebody to answer the questions, be the resource. So we do not have anything like that specifically, though. No. Maya, how can an ISO complete PCI on behalf of the merchant when there are questions on the security assessment that address what merchants do with office security or what happens after they take a card number over the phone that an ISO cannot directly verify? Great question, Maya. So again, you're shifting the liability onto yourself. If you are providing inaccurate information, it is going to be something that's within that. Like, you can do it. Whether or not you're providing accurate information throughout it is where that shift lies. So that's why it's not recommended. The merchant should really be doing it for themselves, but we do have a lot of partners that they want to take that on because they're the POS provider. They're the ones that are wanting to be responsible. They want to do that extra, white glove service, that extra step for their merchants. You definitely do not have to, and it is not recommended, but yes, you can do it as long as there is a PCI compliant attestation on file for the merchant. That is mostly what everyone's trying to care about. That's how you're going to get rid of the fees. That's how you're going to take, the card brands, the acquiring banks, the processor. They're going to have less people within their books that are non-compliant. So that is something where whatever your goal is for your book of business, that's where you want to keep that distinction. So if you are trying to just have no fees across your book, make everybody happy, you're doing it on their behalf, you might be providing some inaccurate information, which isn't ideal. If you want it to be on the merchant, then advising them to make sure that they're doing it, making sure that they understand the questions, kind of being that resource for them is always going to be the better call, but it's not something that a lot of people want to do. So you have to kind of make that distinction for what your personal company and your relationships with your merchants require for the beneficial of everybody involved within your system, for sure. But great question, Maya. Thank you. What is the correct submission header to choose if we have a merchant with a PCI issue? So, Robert, for your question, I'm assuming that has something to do with if you have a reaching out to our Bold Client Services team. So, any subject for the email, I would probably put just like PCI compliance, logging in, questions, PCI questions, things like that. But any email that's sent to our Bold Client Services team, as long as it has something to do with PCI and then in the description specifically states what it is that you need assistance with, our team will 100% reach out and help you with whatever it is that you need to gain access. So thank you for your question, Robert. Okay, so Nathan gave us some information on a QIR. So QIR is Qualified Integrator and Reseller. It's like a TSA pre-check, for lack of a better term, for a POS dealer. Basically, it's an online class and knowledge test in addition to the background check to verify that you don't have past financial crime issues. That's great information, Nathan. And that was Sarah, I believe, who gave us the initial QIR information. So thank you both. That's very, very good information. So if anybody on this call is a QIR qualified integrator and reseller and has taken that knowledge test and has all that information, then definitely try to avoid doing things for your merchants, because that is something where I do think that if you have that type of liability under you for completing those certifications, then you definitely want to make sure you're protecting yourselves as well, for sure. Okay, and then in terms of creating a case, who do I direct that to? So that would be to the support@boldpay.io email. And if you're creating a case through our website, I believe most of our cases through our website are specific to either helping with onboarding and would go to our growth team, or would be more of like a file build. So recommendation would be to just send an email to the support@boldpay.io, like India Ocean IO email. That will go directly to our support team. And as long as the subject matter says something about PCI compliance and the description says what you need help with, that'll be the best way to contact our team. So, well, those are all of the questions. Operator would be TSIS. Robert, if you have more questions, we can, because I'm not sure what you mean by the operator would be TSIS. We can try to get someone to reach out to you directly to help with any of those questions, and we can even get on a separate call if you need to. I just want to make sure I understand what that means. So I really appreciate everyone joining. Thank you so much. It was a great talk. I hope you learned some valuable information, and PCI compliance is not something to ignore. So definitely don't do that. But we look forward to seeing you back in March for understanding a good foundation for KYC, so that you can make sure that you and your merchants have a great relationship from day one. So looking forward to seeing you, and thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Bold Bytes, your bite-sized guide to payments.